Katefu Namaste. This is Kisank Ma'a Keparu coming to you with another broadcast. In this one, I want to talk about Joel Osteen and Pimp Pastors. But before I get to that, I kind of wanted to show you this this magic wand that I've had for about, I think, 4 or 5 years now. I actually walked into a magical shop and I picked it up, and the energy is so strong, it really hurt my hand. And I knew I had to purchase it right away. So, you know, one of the things as an occultist or as a magi or a magician that you need to have is you need to have a good magic wand, and there are a lot that you can purchase online. But I can talk about that in another broadcast, get into the details about all magical equipment, what you should have on your shrine and everything. But again, for another time. So let's talk a little bit about this controversy with Steve Osteen. Some people pronounce his last name Osteen. I don't know when it became Osteen. I always called him Joel Osteen. I was talking with a friend that maybe this is a Mandela effect. We're in a parallel universe where we've branched out and half the population is talking Osteen, the other one's talking Osteen. But anyway, that's not important at this particular moment. Well, there was Hurricane Harvey, Steve Harvey, and it did a lot of devastation in Texas. And as you know, in Texas, Joel Osteen's church, Lakewood Church, is in Houston, Texas, and it's a very big church. It's a stadium that sits about, I think, 16,000 people. And they say he's, you know, when he has his sermons and whatever, over 50,000 people show up. So, and he makes a lot of money. They say he makes about $60 million. He's worth about $60 million. He has 2 large mansions, which are incredible. He has a jet plane. So go figure that. But anyway, during their hurricane, you know, people were left homeless. The water was everywhere. You know, lives were at stake. So, you know, you had all these different facilities, small businesses, other organizations were opening their doors to house people, to help them in time of need. But Lakewood Church was not open. And a statement from Joel Osteen said that the church was flooded and he couldn't open the church. Then we had people from social media went down to the church, filmed the outside exterior of the church to show that it was not flooded. You know, so it kind of led to the idea that maybe Osteen did not want these people in his nice church to ruin the nice rug and everything. But anyway, after he was dragged through social media, he then opened the doors, you know, and people are now questioning this as unchristian-like behavior and things of that nature, given the fact that this man makes, you know, his net worth is $60 million, and he couldn't help these victims of Hurricane Harvey, you know, and which, you know, is basically appalling. You know, but it doesn't surprise me, you know. In fact, Osteen came out with several statements that contradicted each other. One said that the church was flooded. Another one said that, well, the city didn't ask him to open his church to shelter those who are homeless, as if the Christian thing to do is to wait around for the city to ask you to open your doors. You know what I mean? And he actually tweeted when he had the church closed. The tweet said something to the effect of, oh, we're praying for people, and then ask for donations, which is outlandish, you know what I mean? But I used to actually watch, you know, every now and then I'll catch his program on Sundays, and, you know, he's a great motivational speaker. One of the criticisms that he went under in comparison to his father, who he inherited the pulpit from, was that he doesn't really get into Bible verses or stick closely to the Bible. But he's more about like an Anthony Robbins, a motivational speaker who talks about maybe Christ or talks about God, but doesn't really get into the nitty gritty of living the Christian life. So, I don't want to make this about Joel Osteen because it's really not about him because, again, as I said, the fact that he did not open his doors, which would have been the smart thing to do. He could have come off like Rudy Giuliani doing 9/11, been out there helping people. It would have been a great PR campaign for him if his doors were open, and he would have been seen as a great Christian leader, taking people in, giving food out, sheltering everyone, but he didn't do that. So, he came off really negative in the media, which is his own fault. You know what I mean? I mean, if I had a church that housed 16,000 people, one of the first things I would have done was to open it up. That would have been the not even the Christian thing to do, the moral thing to do. You know what I mean? I followed Joel Osteen, his career around for a while, from the time that his father passed away and everything. And I remember him going to the South Bronx and speaking at Yankee Stadium. And even then I had issues with him. He spoke on CNN and he talked about the fact that CNN questioned him about, why are you going to this impoverished neighborhood, the South Bronx, Yankee Stadium, charging these people who living in poverty, and at the time they were, and still is, you got a 45% unemployment rate among black men, yet you're charging for tickets, very expensive too, to have people come and hear you talk. And his reaction was, typical, was saying that he didn't know how much the tickets cost, and that the majority of his income, the 60 million, come from book sales. Really? Book sales? Really? 60 million from just books? I'd like to see your tax return. You know what I mean? And the mere fact that he went into this community, charged all this money to come here and speak, and left, and there are no social program. He left nothing behind in terms of like, hey, is there a Joel Osteen social program to help, single mothers? Is there a Joel Osteen job program? Is there anything that he left behind in that community to help spur the community to get out of the situation that it's currently in? He left nothing. And that is the MO of most of these pimp pastors. I'm not calling Joel Osteen a pimp pastor, but you can, come to your own conclusions about that. But that is, let me go over the numbers because I have some notes here about how much these ministers make. Let's start with Kenneth Copeland. He makes $760 million. Let's say his net worth is $760 million. Pat Robertson, $100 million. Benny Hinn, $42 million. T.D. Jakes, $150 million. Creflo Dollar, his last name is Dollar. That says it all. Creflo Dollar, $27 million. And they say he has $69 million in revenue through his 30,000 members. And Billy Graham is net worth $25 million. This is an incredible amount of money to make when you are labeled a 501c3 status, means that you don't pay taxes. So the thing is, it's like, no one is questioning the fact that these ministers are making this large sum of money. And if you remember the scandal, Creflo Dollar was asking donations to get him a new private jet, that his old one wasn't good enough anymore, so he had to get a new private jet. And one of the most absurd and disgusting comments came from Pat Robertson when Haiti had the earthquake. And then after the earthquake had an epidemic of cholera that the soldiers brought in to Haiti, which is wiping out the Haitians, was saying that they are sinners because they practice their traditional voodoo or voodoo religion. Pat Robertson actually said this because they practice their traditional religion. And if you remember, the Haitians were the first ones to get their freedom from slavery because of the Haitian priest and priestess, or shaman and shawoman, who practiced the ancient religions, and it was through voodoo that they were able to rally their forces under the leadership of Toussaint Overture to enact the Haitian Revolution and get them free. So, this is what their religion did to help them. And Pat Robertson is saying that they're sinners and they're all of this stuff. As he's a whatever. I'm not going to say anything about him. But anyway, my point was, again, not to make this about Joel Osteen, but what I'm trying to tell you is that When you're dealing with these religions, such as Catholicism, Judaism, Islam, and so on, Christianity, that these religions are based on a very left brain perspective, because as I said before, left brain is all about setting a precedent. It segregates, it labels, it defines, where the right brain is synthesis. It brings things together, it sees how they relate, and it doesn't look for conflicts or dichotomies. It looks for how things can work together harmoniously, where the left brain is always looking for a dichotomy. And the left brain is congregated in thinking, meaning that it brings things together based on external things. So it would like say, oh, you white people here, you black people here, you Asian people here. That's how the left brain thinks, where the right brain is synthesis, and it tends to bring things together through abstraction. So the right brain will say that you are all part of the human race, that you are all consciousness, even though you look different on the outside. Through abstractions, we'll see that you're all consciousness. So you are all part of one collective consciousness. And when you base, and the creators, the archetypes, or the architects, I should say, of these religions, as I was saying, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, are left brain thinkers. These were left brain white men who created these religions. And if you want to take it down and go deep down the rabbit hole with Alice in Wonderland, Follow the Rabbit, you'll see that these religions were created as control mechanisms to keep people in place, because they did not want people to understand the power of the right brain, and specifically the ancient culture that Africans, the Mayans, the Chinese left behind, the Sumerians, because what we thought in terms of how is everything in the universe together and collectively part of an ecosystem. How does it interact with one another? Is there an interdependence and interrelationship between things? Yes, there is. Whereas when you base a religion on verbal discourse, meaning you come and you go through a sermon and you think that based on the oratory skills of the preacher that you're saved, when you base a religion on that, it inevitably fails. Because we know that the controller of your actions is the right brain. How do you get to the right brain is through meditation, and what Western science calls hypnotherapy, hypnosis. This is why Scientology, this is why most non-Western religions focus so highly on meditation as the way to change human behavior. It is the only way to change your behavior. Otherwise, it's just going to the surface of things and putting a band-aid on things. You can never really change a person's belief system and behavior simply through sermons and verbal discourse. It does not work. It doesn't work. Hence is why you find men like Joel Osteen and T.D. Jakes who will go out there and profess their love for God and profess to be Christians, but at the same time do the most despicable things and hoard money, hoard resources. Because the only way that you can build a communion with God is through the right brain, through meditation, through transcendental meditation, going into alternate states of consciousness and becoming one with the source of all. It seems so esoteric and cliche, but it is the truth of the matter. And there was a concerted effort by the Roman Catholic Church to basically wipe out, change the religion. And we moved in 325 AD under the Roman Emperor Constantine to take Mary, or at the time was Isis, from the head of the religion to put Jesus, a male, at the head of the religion. So we moved from what we used to practice as a stellar cult to a solar cult. Solar, sun being the external, and stellar, the internal. And this was done on purpose and planned to move from the right brain way of thinking, integrated thinking, integrated brain thinking, where the left and right brain work together, to just polarizing ourselves in the left brain, which creates the idea and the concept of good and evil, heaven and hell. This is what happened. This was planned. And part of the plan was to enslave the planet in these type of Western religions, to make them the most popular religions, you know, and to put these taskmasters in place, these preachers who would preach that the only way to get to God was through them, so that they can make these millions and millions of dollars, ride around in their jet planes and live their lavish lifestyles with 4 or 5 mansions, to keep you from knowing the truth of yourself. And our ancient ancestors, the Egyptian, the Kemetic people, knew the truth, which was to know thyself. And we have fallen from grace by listening to these people, because when they tell you that to get to God, you have to go through an intermediary, you have lost the knowledge of self. You see, ancient religions focused on empowering you to make you God man, God woman, not to empower a minister or preacher who is human, who makes human mistakes. And most of these Christian ministers you'll find are caught up in scandals. They're always caught up in scandals. I want you to look at this thing. Look, for the first thing is, every president that we vote in has to first and foremost prove that he's a Christian, right? And then the first thing they do when they get in office, what is the first thing they do? They start a war. Obama started bombing children, killing children with drones, professing that he wasn't a Muslim, but he was a Christian. This is what has to be done. Let me remind you that one of the greatest atrocities on the face of the planet was the transatlantic slave trade, where up to 60 to 150 million Africans lost their lives at the hands of who? Christians. Christians, the witch hunts to track down women who had gained the occult knowledge, the higher knowledge of sciences. What did we do? We burned them at the stakes for being witches, for possessing higher knowledge. Who did that? Your religious Christians, your Catholics. This is who did this. Let me go say this again. 60 to 150 million Africans lost their lives in the slave trade. In fact, the very first slave ship was named the good ship Jesus. The good ship Jesus. How do we deal with that? Or Jesus Lubank is what they really called it. Under the, it was captained by, it was led by Admiral John Hawkins, and it was given, the ship was given to him by Queen Elizabeth I, who endorsed this enslavement of people. And, you know, going to 1492, which was when slavery actually began, we know that Christopher Columbus, who landed in the Dominican Republic, you know, what did the first thing he do and remember, like, all these slave ships were blessed by ministers before they went off on their voyages. And so what did Christopher Columbus do when he landed in the Dominican Republic? He enslaved the native Taino Indians and forced them into slavery because he wanted to bring back the booty. You know, so, and if you read the stories of what happened when he encountered these ancient people, they were innocent, they were loving, they were spiritual. And at the end, the atrocities that were committed were just unbelievable, unthinkable. And just to give you an idea what happened, the women were raped, things were stuck up their vaginas, the men were decapitated, they played, in fact, his shipmates played soccer with the heads of these Taino Indians. Can we just give a moment to let that sink in of what this man did, who didn't even discover America because he was too stupid a navigator. The one who discovered America was Amerigo Vespucci, who actually discovered it, and yet we still think that Christopher Columbus discovered the Americas. All right, anyway. So, and I want to go a little bit deeper into these slave ships and what happened. When these slave ships would embark on the transatlantic slave trade, you would have sharks that would follow these slave ships because they knew that many of the Africans on board would either be thrown overboard or jump overboard rather than be slaves. And that the women, their babies were thrown overboard. And I had a really good friend who was a filmmaker who was doing documentary research on one slave ship that actually sank. And when they brought this ship up and brought everything that was in the ship, the artifacts, they found that there were little chains that were made to put on the babies, to chain up the babies so the babies couldn't go anywhere. Can you just imagine that, putting chains on a baby? And these are no light little like chains that we have today, like a handcuff that the police will put on you. These are very, very heavy, heavy chains. And they were uncomfortable. They were brutal to wear. Anyway, going into all of this, you know, so when we see how the ancient traditional ways is what we need to go back to, because it's the only way it can change behavior. And, you know, some say, well, it was, you know, you know, we want monotheism. We don't want polytheism or the belief in many gods. But you have to understand that, you know, the African people didn't believe in many different gods. They saw that there was a form, function, relationship, and interdependence, which is the principle of Ma'at, that the one comes in the form of many, and the many are the one. But you see, when you have a left-brain way of thinking, you cannot reconcile that dichotomy. You can only see right, wrong, one, or many. You cannot see how there's an integration of the two. So this is how we get into these paralysis in terms of intellectual thinking, because we can't reconcile things in our life, because it's very difficult to reconcile things when all you're taught to do is to have this type of Hegelian dialectic where you see only two opposing forces. That is it. That's what we're taught to do. And let me go a little bit further into this and look at the fact that, you know, when we have these individuals who we put on this pedestal as being spiritual men, and let me say that T.D. Jakes walks around with a diamond ring. You know, I'm not sure how much it's worth, but that's appalling to flaunt wealth in that manner. But, you know, we call them spiritual. And one of the guys that you hear me talk a lot about is Mahatma Gandhi. Now, when I call him Mahat, okay, Gandhi was a racist, you know, and yet in the history books, he's talked about this man of peace, and that Dr. Martin Luther King was inspired by Gandhi, which, you know, which I don't think he was, because I think he was, Dr. King was more inspired by Akhenaten, who believed in monotheism and who believed in peace, but he almost destroyed Egypt by hurting its military power, by decreasing spending in the military in ancient Egypt, to opening it up to foreign invasion. And he also married a foreign woman, and they set out to create a separate nation within Kemet, or Egypt, where you would worship the sun god, Aten, not Ra, Aten. But he was known as a very peace lover and one of the first monotheists. And part of that came from the fact that his wife, she was a foreigner, and she brought into Kemet, Egypt, foreign ideas. And that foreign ideas was monotheism. And the priests of ancient Egypt got rid of Akhenaten real quick, because they're like, we're not going to, you know, like take funding away from the military to protect Kemet, and we're not going to, you know, destroy a religion that's been thousands of years old, that has helped us and benefited Kemet. So we're not going to suddenly turn everything around because you married this woman of a foreign nation and you have these weird ideas. So anyway, so Gandhi referred to black people as Cathars, which is a derogatory term for Africans. And he tried to start through his newspaper a race riot against blacks, talking about how Indian people were above blacks. And the reason why I say we should never call him Mahat, because Mahat means holy sage, holy person. He wasn't a holy person, because if you're a holy person, you're not engaged in that type of racist thinking. All right. And Gandhi also liked young women, and I'm not going to go into that. So, you know, we need to stop. And I blame the congregation for this. You know, those people who go to Joel Osteen's church, go to T.D. Jakes' church, and who are giving this money to these individuals who are not holy men, who are not spiritual men. I'm sorry, but if you're worth millions of dollars and I ain't got no money, and you know, and I'm giving you money so you can buy your next jet plane, that's something wrong with that, you know? And many of these ministers, they know what they're doing, because their programs come on specific times of the day when they know people are unemployed, sitting at home. They focus on those who are disenfranchised, those who are down and out, and they get them to, drink the Kool-Aid, you know what I mean? And many times they prey upon the idea of diversity. They say, come to my church, we don't look at race, because they know if they can get members of the Black, Latino, Mexican community to come to their church and support their church, that's more money for them. But all the while, if you were to ask them to, take down that picture of white Jesus, because the Bible concretely says that Jesus was not white, then they will have a hissy fit and there'd be a problem. You know what I mean? And individuals like Joel Osteen, the reason why they don't go too much according to the Bible, because in marketing, I don't know if you know this because I work for advertising firms, the more general your message is, the more it is digestible to the masses of the people. The more specific your message becomes, the more you niche market yourself. So, individuals like T.D. Jakes and Joel Osteen and Creflo Dollar try to keep their message universal to encompass more money or more people in their congregation. So they don't want to get into the idea of that Jesus really is a man of color who came out of Northeast Africa, not the Middle East, Northeast Africa, because that's what it was at the time. And he was a person of melanated skin. And if you want to dive deep into this, the story of Jesus is really the story of Haru, or Horus. And the story of Jesus and Mary comes out of the idea of Osiris, Set, the ancient Kemetic gods, and Isis, or Aset, had an immaculate conception to where she gave birth to Haru, and she was visited by the Bennu bird. The bird came and she had an immaculate conception and gave birth to the Savior, Haru, who would resurrect Osiris. Osiris was resurrected from the dead, and therefore he was able to come back to rule and to bring prosperity to the nation of Kemet. And he was also known as the ruler of Upper and Lower Egypt, which is a kind of symbolism for right and left brain integration. And also the Ma'at principle of seeing how things relate to each other and not looking at things in terms of good and evil. So that whole story was stolen from the Metu Neter, or the ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics, and rewritten. And you should also know that the Bible, which is also by King James, who's a pedophile, who loved little kids, boys, had many versions of it. And the version that became the most popular was the King James Version. And there are also 14 chapters of the Bible that are missing, and we're not even dealing with that yet. So, and the Bible, if you go back to the original Kemetic scriptures, is based on astrotheology, a study of the stars, and even the Christians don't realize this because they're too dumb to do their research. And the whole idea, they keep professing this judgment day, the end times, which is really, the end times come from the Kemetic religion, where you have the zodiac sign and the precession of the sun through each sign, through Libra to Cancer, and each precession takes 2,500 years, and now we're at the end of the Pisces, and this is the end times for judgment, and the new precession will begin with Aquarius, So they don't even understand where their science comes from in the Bible, which is how you have a lot of references to Jesus and fish and water, walking on water, turning water to wine. Water symbolizes the Pisces sign, the fish sign, But unless you study high science, you won't understand that, So I wanted to just get into some of this, to talk a little about where we are as a culture, where we are as a people. And I'm not here, I don't see, like, as I said before, Joel Osteen and these pimp pastors as the enemy. Because what happens is, when you have, and in the African traditional culture, you don't look at these individuals, you look at what has society done to produce these individuals. Because if you have a society that doesn't elevate and educate people, you're going to have these people, you're going to have degenerate behavior. You're going to have con artists. You're going to have these things that come along and that are going to take us down a very deep, dark path. So, you know, when you see these ministers and the way they're acting, it makes perfect sense because, and the congregation that supports them and gives them millions and millions of dollars, it makes perfect sense because you have a society that doesn't value education and higher knowledge and wisdom. You know, when the Library of Alexandria was destroyed, burned down, and we lost so much knowledge. We've set back, some people estimate we're set back at least 1,000 years in knowledge because of what happened then. So you have to understand that we're living in the dark ages. You know, you have to understand that the Christian crusade, you know, the witch hunts, all of that comes from people who don't understand the science of communion with God, the science of religion. So all they do is they read something and they practice something on a Sunday and think they're spiritual and think they're religious, or they come at you on their shows, their programs every Sunday, smiling and making it seem like their lives are just prosperous because God, you know, God has blessed them. And let me talk a little bit about that. Because these individuals are engaged in what they call as prosperity ministry, prosperity ministry. And what that is, if you don't know what that is, that means that if you give me money, God will bless you with money. That's what that prosperity ministering is. And a lot of these ministers are on the bandwagon of this, and they call a lot of flack, and now they're backtracking, especially T.D. Jakes, who now says he's not a prosperity minister, but he did claim that he was. You know, and the whole idea behind prosperity ministering is that if you're poor, this is what ministers like Frederick, K.C. Price said, you know, like if you're poor, then that's because you're doing something wrong. You're not obeying the word of God. Never mind the fact that you have the World Bank, the IMF, that's bankrupting third world nations on purpose to keep them in debt and to keep them from building an infrastructure so they can't be a world power. And one day possess a nuclear bomb like North Korea. Never mind that those circumstances are in place. Never mind that African people here in North America have gone through slavery and never given reparations, so they're many steps behind. So they can't catch up, and that the median income for Black people in America is $1,700, while the median income for whites is $10,000, and that's because whites never went through slavery. So never mind those circumstances exist. The reason you're poor is because you're not obeying the word of God. That's prosperity ministry. That's what they're talking about. So meanwhile, if you come to his church and you tithe, give 10% of your income, and they have ATM machines in the lobbies. If you tithe and you give him money, then God will reward you with money. What kind of God is that? Seriously, what kind of God is that? That is some sick stuff, you know. That is, talk about skewing and misinterpretation of the Bible itself. Now, the Bible can be a great book if you look at it from the correct perspective. In fact, when Christopher Columbus landed in Dominican Republic and met the Taino Indians, one thing he noticed was that they were just like the most spiritual people. In fact, when you read the Bible, it talks about Adam and Eve, who weren't ashamed of their nakedness. Read the works of Herodotus, who went to ancient Egypt, Kemet, and noticed that the Kemetian people had children running around naked, and they were naked, and they weren't ashamed of their bodies. There was no shame, and there was no sexual perversion. But in Western society, there is a shaming of the body. There is sexual perversion, because this is what the left brain does, because it thinks concretely. It only can look at the external. Where African people never engage in such, shameful acts as looking at the body as being sinful, So, Herodotus was amazed at the fact that, there was no pedophiles, there was no crime, this is his own words. You can read this in his books, and this is African spirituality. This was not just in Egypt, this is all of Africa. We didn't have serial killers running around killing people. But again, when you base a society off left brain thinking, this is what you come up with. We are polarized in one way of thinking, and we can't think any other way. If you go to a Christian church and the idea of meditating, they're going to say, oh, that's communing with the devil. It's evil. Of course they're going to say that because they have been programmed to say that, because the ruling elite, the oligarchy wants to keep you away from any power or anything that will empower you to make you realize who you are, which is God man and God woman. You don't need an intermediary to save you. You don't need that. You don't need someone to come along and anoint you. You have that power within yourself. You know, and the problem that we face is when we look at Ma'at, which is the goddess of truth, justice, and righteousness, and when we look at Tehuti, the god of wisdom, they go hand in hand, because going back to integrated brain thinking, Ma'at sets the law. Tehuti tells Ma'at how to administer the law, because the law is no good unless you have a measure on which to administer it. Without Tehuti, wisdom, to know when the law should apply, you degrade into dogma. And then you start applying the law when it shouldn't be applied. You become too adherent to the law because you don't understand circumstances and how things impact one another. Case in point, I mentioned the poverty and how you have US government bankrupting these third world nations who don't have an opportunity to build up their infrastructure. So you come along and you say stupid, idiotic things like they are poor because they don't believe in God. Well, most of them are more spiritual than you, Frederick. So you need to get off that shit. Bragging about, every Sunday he brags about how much, how many cars he has, his tailor-made suits. I'm not kidding. Watch his program and you'll see this. So he's caught up in all that stuff. I want all of you to start looking at alternative religions. Look at the ancient religions, even in the Greek religions. Look at what they did and what they accomplished in terms of engineering, in terms of philosophy, in terms of morality. It far exceeds anything we have today coming out of these pimp pastors. And again, like I said, I don't want to blame them individually, because you have to look at collectively as a society what we've done to give birth to these individuals and to give birth to the congregation that supports them, because we have to look at each other and say, what have we done wrong? That's the African way of doing it. It takes a village to raise a child. We're all culpable. We're all responsible for this. And because of the principle of Ma'at, that there's an interconnectedness and interdependence between all things, my thoughts resonate and vibrate, and other people pick up on that. So, if you're having negative thoughts and negative ideas, then you're permeating the ether with those ideas. And people are picking up on those, and they're acting upon those. So this is why we have to watch our thinking and watch the way we act in our everyday lives. Ma'at says to know truth, you have to live life. Ma'at is the living of truth and not just the word or reading of truth, the living of truth. So with that said, I'm going to leave you with that, because I don't want to go off. I can go deeper and deeper and cite lots of incidences throughout history and more about how Christianity has put the world into darkness, but it's not a Christian problem that we're facing. It is a way of thinking and acting, which is the problem that we're facing today. So if you like this broadcast, I appreciate if you subscribe to my channel and hit the like button. This is Kasank Ma'a Keperu, and that's all for now. Amen Ra.